Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we are walking through a case that is absolutely foundational to modern American child safety and missing persons history.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's an image that instantly signals a loss of national innocence, I think. West Des Moines, Iowa, September 1982. Yeah. You've got the profound quiet of an early Sunday morning delivery route.
Yeah.
Shattered, not by, immediate violence, but by a chilling, really symbolic piece of evidence.
That abandoned red wagon.
Yeah.
Just sitting there. It was still full of the heavy Sunday editions of the Des Moines Register papers, right? Sitting innocuously at a corner, its routine just abruptly canceled.
Exactly. And the paperboy, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch, was simply gone. His disappearance didn't just break the heart of a single community. It really created a profound cultural shift in America.
A huge shift.
And that shift is why this case remains so important, As we explore the sources, we really face these two parallel narratives. Was Johnny Gosch a simple, tragic abduction that went unsolved due to, early investigative failures?
Right. Or, as his relentless mother, Noreen Gosch, has claimed for decades, was his vanishing tied to something much bigger? A far-reaching organized criminal conspiracy, a theory that, it continues to divide investigators and the public, and it created this enduring symbol of distrust in authority.
It is such heavy material, but the resulting legislative and cultural impact is just undeniable. Our mission today is really to unpack the facts of that morning and then analyze how the ensuing vacuum of answers allowed this powerful, really complicated conspiracy narrative to take root.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The morning itself, September 5, 1982.
Right. So Johnny was 12 years old, born back in November 1969. He was, by all accounts, a typical West Des Moines kid doing a pretty demanding job for his age, delivering that massive Sunday paper.
Yeah, those Sunday papers were huge back then.
They really were. And the routine was, sacred and predictable.
He left home shortly after 5:45 a.m. His tools were simple. His canvas delivery bag, that famous red wagon for carrying the bulk of the papers.
Right, the wagon. And his dog, Gretchen, who often went with him, at least on the first part of the route.
And Gretchen is actually a really crucial detail here, something investigators noted right away. A well-trained companion animal like that, returning home alone, relatively early.
Oh.
Well, it dramatically signaled to the family that the routine hadn't just been finished normally.
Yeah.
It had been violently or, unexpectedly interrupted. Dogs don't usually just abandon their person like that unless they're separated abruptly.
Right. Something was wrong.
Mm.
Now, despite the time of day, it's pre-dawn darkness on a quiet Sunday, there were immediate eyewitness reports, which, in cases of stranger abduction, that's often a rare gift for investigators.
Precisely. Yeah, that's often not the case. Here, two separate witnesses provided similar accounts. A neighbor named Mike and, maybe most importantly, a man named John Rossi. Both saw Johnny interacting with an unknown man near the paper drop-off location.
Okay, near where he would have been getting his papers ready.
Exactly, where he would have been assembling his papers for the route.
And what's fascinating here is the specificity of the suspect description they gave. They saw a stocky man in a blue two-toned car.
That's right, a stocky man, blue two-toned car. And John Rossi actually engaged with Johnny about this man. Rossi reported asking Johnny, what was going on.
And what did Johnny say?
Well, Johnny's response was seemingly mundane, almost dismissive. He said the man was merely asking for directions.
Asking for directions.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this interaction is key because it shows the perpetrator likely used a very low-key conversational tactic, that classic non-threatening request to engage the boy before presumably escalating the situation somehow.
It really underscores the terrifying ease with which an abductor can break that routine, can't they? Just by posing as someone needing simple, innocuous help.
Absolutely. And the timeline quickly spirals out of control from there. It wasn't actually police intervention that alerted the family something was wrong.
No, it was a customer call. Right.
Exactly. It was the failure of the service. A customer called the Gosch house around 7:05 a.m., complaining they hadn't gotten their paper delivery. And Johnny's father, John Sr., immediately went out to check the route.
And that's when he discovered it. That horrifying tableau, the wagon, just abandoned, still full of papers, sitting there at a corner on the route. It's such a powerful symbol, isn't it? A life put on pause, a routine just abruptly terminated mid-task.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now, here's where we absolutely must talk about the initial law enforcement failure. A failure that in the sources you see consistently cited as the original sin, maybe, of this investigation.
Okay.
Noreen Gosch called police around 8:30 a.m., but officers apparently did not arrive for a reported 45 minutes.
45 minutes in an abduction case. I mean, every second counts for survivability, for evidence preservation. That's just an agonizing amount of time lost. Why the delay? What was the reasoning?
Well, it speaks to a huge, entrenched systemic flaw of that era. See, prior to the Gosch case, many jurisdictions operated under this problematic 24 to 72-hour mandatory waiting period for missing persons reports, even for minors.
Seriously, even for a 12-year-old.
Yes. Police often initially treated these calls as, possible runaways or maybe family disputes. The philosophy was simple but incredibly flawed. They argued that if they dedicated maximum resources immediately to every single report, the force would be paralyzed by cases of truancy or kids just staying out late temporarily.
But the immediate consequences of that delay for a case like Johnny Gosch's, they must have been devastating for evidence. We're talking early September in Iowa. You've got dew on the ground, maybe neighborhood traffic picking up, or even just the sun coming up and changing the light, degrading things.
Absolutely. Think about what was potentially lost in that 45-minute window and then the hours before the police even really started canvassing properly. Any trace evidence, footprints, tire tracks, maybe in soft soil near the wagon, perhaps a fiber on the wagon handle, all of that would be incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, vulnerable to degradation from weather, neighborhood pets, or even just citizens walking by, maybe touching the wagon or retrieving the abandoned papers themselves.
Exactly. This wasn't treated initially as a potential crime in progress. It was treated more like an administrative missing person filing.
Yeah.
And that critical window for forensic opportunity just slammed shut.
And the slow, almost dismissive initial response, that's the critical gap, isn't it? The one that Noreen Gosch later leveraged to fuel her distrust and her search for alternative answers outside the official channels.
Precisely. And the public scrutiny, the pressure, it only intensified when just 2 years later, tragedy struck again, right there in the same city. We have to briefly mention the disappearance of Eugene Martin in 1984.
Another Des Moines paperboy. Similar age, similar circumstances. Just awful.
Yeah, it was horrifying, and it immediately provided this terrible weight to the emerging theory, the one that Noreen Gosch would really champion, that this wasn't just a localized one-off crime.
It started to look like a pattern.
It strongly suggested a serial predator, or maybe even more disturbingly, an organized ring specifically operating in the area, perhaps even targeting boys on these early, vulnerable paper routes. This fear that a pattern was emerging deeply impacted public and parental vigilance really across the entire Midwest.
And that fear, that idea of an organized predator, brings us squarely into the second and highly controversial thread of this story. The claims made by Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, and her decades-long pursuit of answers that went way beyond traditional law enforcement channels.
Right. Noreen Gosch's transformation from, heartbroken mother to this tireless national advocate, it fueled massive legislative change, which we'll get to. But the sources show her hope, and her relentless pursuit of answers also led her down paths involving complex, often unverified claims. She was, understandably perhaps, willing to follow any thread, no matter how dubious it seemed, especially in the absence of actionable police leads.
And the most extraordinary of these claims occurred, 15 years after the disappearance? This created a real rift between the official police narrative, or lack thereof, and the public memory of the case. We're talking about the alleged 1997 visit.
That's right. It's a really striking claim.
Yeah.
Noreen claims that in March 1997, 15 years after the abduction, Johnny, who would have been 27 years old then, knocked on her apartment door around 2:30 in the morning.
2:30 a.m.
Yeah. And supposedly he was accompanied by an unidentified man described as sort of imposing and protective.
And the details Noreen provided, they were designed to leave no doubt, at least for herself and for the authorities she later spoke to. She stated she recognized her son immediately, but that he had to show her a birthmark on his chest for final confirmation of identity.
Yes, that birthmark detail is often cited. And the narrative he allegedly shared with her, well, that's the fuel for the long-standing conspiracy theory surrounding this case.
What does she say he told her?
According to Noreen, Johnny told her he was abducted by a pedophile organization or a sex trafficking ring. And crucially, he said he was essentially cast aside when he became too old for their purposes.
Oh.
Yeah. And he supposedly feared for his life and was living under an assumed identity. He explained, according to her, that he couldn't return home safely because of the persistent threat posed by this ring.
This narrative, whether it's true or perhaps something constructed out of trauma and hope, it's profoundly powerful, isn't it? It offers two things the police investigation couldn't provide: an explanation for his disappearance and a reason why he couldn't just come home.
Exactly. It provides a continuous story. But it is, we have to stress, an alleged phantom reunion that has never been substantiated by authorities. No corroborating evidence, no trace of this accompanying man.
And we have to acknowledge the immediate skepticism that arose, even within the family unit itself. Johnny's father, John Sr., he and Noreen divorced in 1993. He publicly stated his strong doubt about the authenticity of this visit. He suggested the trauma had perhaps manifested in a very complex, maybe wishful way for Noreen.
Right. That internal family disagreement is a significant part of the story, too.
That duality is just central to this enduring mystery. How do you, as an investigator, or even just as a curious observer trying to understand this case, how do you reconcile the deep, abiding belief of a mother who absolutely insists she saw her adult son with the complete inability of law enforcement to verify that claim in any way or locate this alleged accompanying individual? It's difficult.
It really is. It remains Noreen's story alone, fundamentally. And it's one of these central, powerful, yet completely unverified claims that defines the public perception of this case. And unfortunately, the high profile of this case also attracted just an astonishing amount of exploitation and outright hoaxes over the years.
Oh, definitely.
Which further contaminated the investigation and just preyed on the family's obvious desperation.
We see that tragic pattern repeated again and again in high-profile missing persons cases, don't we? It's heartbreaking.
Oh, absolutely. Consider the 2006 captivity photos. Noreen reported finding photos left on her doorstep, which she claimed depicted Johnny in captivity, bound and gagged. You can only imagine, for a mother searching for decades, receiving something like that would have been an absolute emotional wrecking ball.
Devastating. But law enforcement pretty quickly stepped in to dismiss them, didn't they? Identifying them as basically a cruel and complex hoax.
Yes, and critically, police noted that some of the photographs were positively identified as being from an already solved Florida case involving child pornography. So while Noreen insisted one of the boys depicted was Johnny, the photos ultimately failed to provide any concrete evidence. It was sadly consistent with a long history of false tips and cruel pranks that plague these high-profile missing cases and, frankly, further erode public trust in any new leads that emerge.
And even earlier than the photos, the Gosch family was directly defrauded, weren't they, by a pretty sophisticated con man during their desperate search back in 1985.
That's right. This was a man named Robert Herman Meyer II. He specifically targeted Noreen and John Sr., claiming he had connections to an outlaw motorcycle club and alleging that Johnny had been taken as part of a child slavery ring. Now, this played directly into the fears of organized crime and trafficking that were really rampant in public consciousness in the mid-'80s.
And he got money out of them.
He did. Meyer managed to defraud the family of over $11,000, which was a lot of money then, promising Johnny's return and feeding them complex, supposedly insider information.
That detail, $11,000 paid to a stranger claiming ties to outlaw bikers, it just illustrates the profound psychological vulnerability of a family grasping at any straw, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And in a really tragic twist that highlights Noreen's unyielding commitment to pursuing her own leads, no matter the source, she later criticized the FBI for arresting Meyer for fraud.
She criticized them for arresting the guy who defrauded her.
Yes. She argued that his arrest destroyed her credibility, or maybe her channel, to pursue a potential ransom scenario that Meyer had allegedly set up. It shows how deeply committed she was to following any possible avenue, even one clearly based on fraud and exploitation, if she believed it might somehow lead to finding her son.
Wow. This entire backdrop then, the systemic police failure at the start, the lack of any verifiable answers for years, the cruel hoaxes, and then this extraordinary unverified alleged visit. It really is the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy threads, isn't it? It feels like the exact point where verifiable tragedy meets the highly speculative side of the internet, even before the internet as we know it really existed.
It is, absolutely. The specific claims Noreen made of a trafficking ring, of organizational complexity, maybe even government links down the line, they didn't emerge in a vacuum. They began to fuse with these broader 1980s theories that were circulating at the time, particularly those concerning organized networks, elite misconduct, and, government overreach or cover-ups.
Right. In that era, especially following major scandals and shifts in public trust, there was maybe a heightened willingness in some circles to believe in large-scale cover-ups. And you start to see the emergence, particularly later online, of these generalized theories linking the Gosch case to things like the highly publicized Franklin Credit Union scandal.
Yes, the Franklin scandal, which itself involved explosive claims of high-level political figures tied to organized abuse rings.
So the connection gets made.
This is critical. The Gosch case, in these online forums and discussion threads, often stops being viewed as an isolated, albeit tragic, abduction. It becomes woven into these larger narratives, sometimes referencing things like MKUltra-style mind control or elite ritual abuse networks. It positions the case as this potent symbol of deep state cover-ups and systemic corruption.
Which, for some people, might be a more emotionally satisfying explanation, perhaps, than just admitting the possibility that the police simply missed crucial evidence in the first 48 hours of a terrible but maybe isolated crime.
Exactly. It transforms the case from a heartbreaking street-level tragedy into this grand, almost operatic systemic mystery. And that validates, for some, their existing distrust in authority and institutions.
What's fascinating is how the public, especially now with online digital detectives and forums, views these two parallel realities. You have the verified facts of the 1980 abduction, the wagon, the witnesses, the car, and then you have the unverified but incredibly powerful and persistent narrative of the 1997 visit and the organized crime angle. This is really where documented fact meets folklore, isn't it? And the folklore often provides the more compelling, though deeply disturbing plotline for many.
It absolutely does. The narrative is just stronger in a way.
But regardless of what you or I or anyone believes about the specific details of Noreen's later claims, the case had a profound, undeniable, and verifiable cultural legacy that changed child safety in America forever. This truly became the cultural lens through which a whole generation viewed the threat to missing children.
This is the undisputed, non-negotiable thread of truth in all of this. The immediate, high-profile nature of the Gosch case, tragically amplified by Eugene Martin's disappearance just 2 years later, demanded a new, urgent media strategy. Something had to be done to get the word out.
And that strategy resulted in one of the most iconic, frankly unforgettable images of the 1980s. Anyone who lived through it remembers it.
Indeed. Johnny Gosch's photo, often right alongside Eugene Martin's, became one of the first and certainly one of the most iconic faces printed on milk cartons nationally. This initiative, known colloquially, of course, as the Milk Carton Kids, was a massive grassroots public awareness campaign.
Just ubiquitous. The sources suggest that by the height of that campaign, something like nearly 5 billion milk cartons circulate annually with these pictures. That means images of missing children entered nearly every American kitchen, every breakfast table.
That single image, that face on the carton, became completely synonymous with the missing child crisis of the 80s. It fundamentally changed how these cases were publicized, and, importantly, how the public became involved, or at least aware. It ushered in the era of heightened parental vigilance, this sudden, sharp realization that abduction wasn't just some distant movie plot. It was a real possibility for any child, even one just doing their paper route in a quiet neighborhood. The cultural effect was immediate and incredibly widespread.
And beyond the cultural awareness, legislatively, the impact was also immediate and direct. And it was aimed squarely at fixing that initial systemic failure we talked about earlier, that waiting period.
Absolutely. The case directly led to the passing of the Johnny Gosch bill in Iowa. This is a really critical piece of legislation that specifically targeted that failure point in the system.
What specifically did that bill mandate? How did it change the actual practical steps for a police department when they received a missing child report?
Okay, so it did something crucial. It eliminated that mandatory 24 to 72-hour waiting period for missing children under the age of 18, full stop.
No more waiting.
No more waiting.
Yeah.
It required law enforcement to become immediately involved, and that meant actually filing reports, initiating searches, coordinating and communicating with other agencies the minute the report was received. No more initial assessment of probably just a runaway, let's wait and see. It forced a necessary systemic overhaul in that initial law enforcement response, finally recognizing officially that the first few hours are absolutely vital in securing evidence and finding leads in these cases.
So you can draw a direct positive line from the tragic abandonment of that red wagon in West Des Moines in 1982 to a permanent change in how police departments across the nation, because Iowa's bill really served as a national model, didn't it? Approach missing child reports today.
That is the profound positive impact, the undeniable legacy of the Gosch case. It exposed those systemic administrative failures in law enforcement's initial approach. And it really helped usher in the era of national missing children awareness, public reporting databases, and necessary legislation, leading eventually to things like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
So as we look back across, 4 decades now, we're left trying to sort of manage these two conflicting realities, aren't we? You've got the verifiable facts, the wagon, the car, the witness reports from 1982, set against this incredibly emotionally charged but ultimately unverified narrative of organized crime and that alleged 1997 visit.
That balance is the enduring difficulty of this case. The verifiable facts point toward a likely abduction, possibly by an opportunistic predator who used that asking for directions pretense. Simple, awful, but plausible. However, the unverified claims, though often dismissed by police and even doubted by some family, they remain the dominant public narrative. Why? Because they attempt to provide a continuous, albeit terrifying, explanation for the ongoing cold case. The mother's powerful belief, her narrative, essentially filled the void left by the stalled investigation.
It's fascinating to analyze how trauma and intense media attention shaped Noreen Gosch's search over the decades. Her decades-long, very public pursuit of the organized crime theory, even when facing skepticism from her ex-husband and law enforcement, it really cemented that specific narrative as the dominant public understanding of Johnny's fate, didn't it?
It absolutely did, and it speaks to the immense power of a parent's belief, especially when it's compounded by such deep, unresolved trauma. When the police failed initially, with that slow, problematic response, a profound trust deficit was created right at the start. And in that void, the idea that the abduction wasn't random, but was linked to a far more complex, elusive, and powerful enemy, a conspiracy essentially, it gave Noreen a structure for her fight. It allowed her, perhaps needed her, to believe her son was taken and was being hidden somewhere by powerful forces, not simply vanished without a trace after a random act. It provided a perpetual goal, defeating the conspiracy, not just solving a single cold case.
But the ultimate outcome, the biggest tangible legacy, really is the legislative change.
Absolutely. The Gosch case represents a necessary, painful societal reckoning. It forced the realization that the systems we had in place, systems designed to protect children, were fundamentally flawed. They were operating on outdated, maybe resource-saving policies that potentially cost precious lives or crucial time. His tragedy forced America, really forced all of us, to look much more closely at the vulnerability of children and the inadequacy of the response.
Yet here we are 4 decades later, and the central haunting mystery remains completely unresolved.
It does. The lack of a body, the lack of any arrests, and these enduring conflicting narratives surrounding the 1997 visit. They leave the case permanently unsettled. It is the absolute quintessential cold case, one that forced massive systemic change but ultimately failed to deliver justice or answers for Johnny himself. It remains an open wound, really, an enduring symbol of innocence lost, and that persistent distrust in the institutions that promised protection but failed him early on.
That image is truly what lingers, isn't it? A child's face, just 12 years old, staring out from a milk carton, asking the whole nation, well, what questions still echo for them, for you? The story of Johnny Gosch is such a tragic reminder of how quickly routine can shatter, and just how long and incredibly complex the search for truth and for system reform can ultimately last.
A profound and necessary piece of American history, I think, forcing systemic change out of just immense sorrow and the enduring power of a mother's fight, however controversial parts of it became.
Next time on Threads of Truth, we revisit one of the internet's most enduring mysteries, the strange and tragic story of Elisa Lam, a case that continues to fascinate and disturb digital detectives worldwide.